Welcome to Truck Tech. I'm Thomas Wasson, and today we're talking about the grid. And I'm not telling about the recent Tron movie, not that grid, the grid about charging EVs and infrastructures. I'm super excited. We'll be talking with the folks at Optigrid and the technology behind their chargers, a little bit about infrastructure, what you need to know. And before we dive into bringing on our guest, we do have a little bit of a backstory. I'd recently gotten to write about them and Orange Juicer, which is at the IANA Expo earlier in September. Orange EV and Optigrid had unveiled this new DC charger called the Orange Juicer. It's the greatest name ever. And one of the big things, of course, is in the fleet electrification game. You've got to not only save cost, reduce delays, but make sure you have the right amount of uptime and the right amount of juice. And so luckily with the folks at Orange EV, they're not squeezing oranges, they're squeezing out megawatts and kilowatts. And so we're going to be talking with Optigrid. Let's dive in. Let's welcome our guest here, Tyler Phillipi. He's the CEO of Optigrid. I've had the pleasure of talking with him as well in the past for the article, but we're going to have a good interview about what they're working on. And so, Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. It was great to talk to you last time. And I'm glad you love the name. You know, it brings a lot to the table.
We're going to put literally lightning in a bottle, but in the EV charging sense. And so before we dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll dive into Optigrid.
Yeah, happy to. For over a decade, I've been involved in automotive telematics and kind of just connecting vehicles to the internet. And as that's progressed and as electrification has taken hold, I shifted towards fleet electrification and, car share and service. And the last company, I dove deep into demand side management of EV charging. So basically trying to make the EVs that are charging, especially in fleets, not hurt the grid or not be so impactful. So we were selling software to utilities. And after 3 years of building that up and funding it and selling it, the folks at Orange EV and, some folks around them, including their board, decided they wanted to take the plunge and buy up this battery integrated technology and build a company out of it. And so they came a knocking and I answered the call and picked up the whole family, moved it over to here in Kansas City. And I'm right here in the headquarters of Orange EV building out my team.
And so when we're talking about the process, I think it's important. I like the idea of vertical integration or having the integrations because I got to write some reports on the challenges of making sure that you can charge. So having that kind of connectivity and that inherentness. Let's dive into first the technology behind how these Optigrid chargers work. And then we'll talk about some of the processes like, making sure you can charge, filling up, when to fill, the whole shebang.
Yeah, so if anybody's familiar with fleet electrification, they've probably run into the need to have BESS, a battery energy storage system on site to help fill the gap for what the grid can provide, or to prevent you from overdrawing from the grid and having these massive bills. And so a BESS, a battery energy storage system, is something that you contract to build on site. Well, in that, you have to have grid input, you have to have batteries, you have to have these interchanges, and then you stick it out and then you plug it into a charger. Well, what we did, what the technology is built to do, is to take all those components that are sitting out on a 10 by 30 foot square, maybe at EVgo, Electrify America, all the kind of roadside DC fast chargers. We put all of that into one box. And so there's no construction, there's no permitting, there's no engineered design. It literally turns all that stuff into one, basically BESS plus DC fast charging in a box. So we can ship it, it can land, wired directly in with whatever power is available. No need to upgrade your power. And then you're instantly starting to charge at high capacity, 200 kW.
So these are like giant totem poles. How tall are these orange juicers that you all are making? And let's talk about that, because one of the big things I hear in the rollout is, like you said, most other solutions, I've got to dig all these trenches. I've got to have the special stuff. I need like 5 different pieces of hardware.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, what do these things look like?
Yeah, this one's a little tall. It's around 8 feet tall, so I can touch the top of it. In most of the locations we're looking at, especially when you're looking at freight, intermodal, port, I mean, it's small in that comparison. But when you're comparing it to like a level 2 at your home, it'll seem quite large. And that's because typically these systems are spread out over by 10 by 30 foot squares, so there's never been any kind of need to make them small. So we're the world's smallest BESS plus DCFC in existence, not the world's largest DC fast charger.
And the technology is so cool because having the battery integrated storage, one of the big questions I hear from folks is, well, how much are you going to draw from the grid? When do you draw from it? How do I like replenish the juice without breaking the bank? Talk a little bit about that because that feels like that's one of the bigger trends we're seeing in electrification is taking advantage of battery technology and trying to store that charge like in a almost like a little fuel island, like a fuel tank instead of
Mm-hmm.
under the thing. It's actually incorporated, and then you're basically slowly refilling it when the time is right.
Yeah, you've got it dead right. Instead of just pulling on the minimal power that comes right out of the wall, right out of the panel, we're storing it up. So you don't need to have a big pipe from the generation that could be hundreds of miles away all the way to your facility. We can just tap into whatever's there and slowly fill up. When we're going and working with a facility, what we do is we say, what currently is electrified on your site? How much capacity do you have today? And then kind of what's your fleet electrification plan? And since me and a bunch of really much smarter people than me here and through our network of folks, they really can kind of see what the fleet electrification plan is doing. And we can say, right now you need X and you need Y over the next, call it 3 to 4 years. Let's just bring out what you need with your available power so we can add one and then another and then another and then another. So basically, it allows all these fleets to keep rolling out trucks and not pause and wait a year or two to build out some big infrastructure or wait on the utilities. And waiting on the utilities, if you're on the coast, could be 3 years. Waiting for utility in the central of the United States could be slightly different, or in Texas, you just got to roll out the dough. But once everyone starts doing this, or a big AI data center comes into your backyard and your energy costs go up double, then getting the utilities attention is going to get harder and harder. So it's already an issue for a bunch of folks who are electrifying, but between now and 5 years from now, it's going to be the number one blocker for all transportation electrification.
And let's talk about the approach because there's AC to DC conversions. I know that through rock and roll, and then I also know it through Tesla and Edison and their great battle. Unfortunately, the
Mm-hmm.
casualty was an elephant at the time. But when we're thinking of the charging, what is the big deal? Why should folks understand the AC to DC, and kind of how does that tie into how this unified platform, what makes it so special?
Yeah, so the grid is AC, alternating current, and we have to convert it to DC to charge a vehicle. Your level 1 or your level 2 at home, which is AC, it's actually using a charger inside of your vehicle to convert from AC to DC. And every time you do that, there's a little bit of a loss. So when you're looking at a facility and you have a facility that you don't add additional power to, and you push it over to a battery, a typical BESS, it has to be converted to DC. Or if you get rooftop solar, which is DC, it converts it to AC and goes down into your facility and then back to DC if it's going into a battery. Every time you convert it, you lose a bit. And so with a BESS, you're converting AC to DC to go into the battery, DC to AC to go over to a charger or a dispenser of some kind, and then AC back to DC to go back in the vehicle. And every time you do that, one, it's a breakage in the chain. There's a chance for it not to work. There's also a supplier. So whether it be the converters, the transformers, the batteries, or the DCFC, those are a lot of times different suppliers. And so now you have a breakage in the supply chain for each one of them, like one of them not being available. And in the end, if you can get it all into one box, which is what we're doing, and you make it non-unique, meaning what's inside the box is the same in every single orange juicer. They're exactly the same. So we can have our Ford moment where we can scale up the production of these since they're all identical and drive down the costs. So that way it gets cheaper and cheaper to the point where maybe it doesn't even make sense to go and just buy a regular old DC fast charger. Maybe all of them will have batteries in them eventually.
That was the coolest thing. I got to check out the folks at Zeem, and one of the things they were talking about was how much juice was lost. And at first I didn't
Mhm.
understand it, but from Tennessee, we know how to make illegal bootleg and moonshine. And they used to say you would lose your alcohol vapors if you didn't have a good seal. So in the name of the
Hmm.
game of charging, you want to make sure as well that you have a good seal so you don't lose any radical electrons disappearing. And so is that one of the advantages
Hmm.
of having it integrated into this 8 foot tall pole? Because what I hear is that, like you said, I lose some from the transformer, I lose some 30 foot long of like high voltage lines, some of the electrons disappear. So when I'm trying to get paid for like 500 kilowatts, by the
Yeah.
time it comes down, I may only get like, 400. And it's almost like you're losing money through these cracks. And instead of
Yeah.
moonshine, it's just electrons.
Yeah, in this case, it doesn't get lost. It just gets converted to heat. So anytime you try to slow down electrons or you try to carry them, when they're passing through a material, they heat up, and so it's lost through heat, which also is kind of one of those things that, when it gets really hot, there's all these issues with the utilities and just all the transmission stuff. But in general, the financial loss isn't that big. What's really a big loss is having to make sure each one of those connections between those systems works. And when, for some reason, the number one issue right now that most fleets are facing is when you plug in your vehicle, whether it be just plug and play, like there's no payment processing or anything, that it fails to charge on the first plug. There's a bunch of articles out there right now, and when that failure happens, right now there's a bunch of questions. Is it the truck? Is it the charger? Is it the grid supply to the charger? Is it the battery backup to the grid supply to the charger? There's all these questions. And the more we can get it all in one box and serviced by us, we remove any of those concerns and questions. And then the closer we have the relationship as the charging provider with the vehicle provider, then we can figure it out and get it fixed ahead of time and make sure that it doesn't happen as much. That's part of the reason why we're so close with all the trucks being sold here at Orange EV is we want to make sure that that relationship between the two never breaks.
It reminds me of a study that I wrote on from Charger Help or Charge Help, and they said like 1 out of 3 nearly that when you're plugging it in, there's a problem because either the handshake, the payment doesn't work, you haven't upgraded your software, so the vertical integration is another added benefit because you're taking away some of the ways that somebody else could say, well, I'm sorry, man,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna have to just get a whole new thing because I got this new hardware or this brand new battery electrics using a different kind of software. We're not jiving.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the more we talk to like 3PLs and the more we talk to people with like lots of different, facilities, different, fleet hubs in different locations, different people representing different kind of port authorities, what they're saying is the charging is failing a lot, that it's falling down, or the charging manufacturer is overpromising and under delivering, or they're not as responsive. And for us, I mean, we're going with Orange EV everywhere. So if the trucks don't work, we hear about it. If there's any kind of issue that the operator isn't going to know the difference between whether it's the truck or the charger or whatever, it needs to just be dumb simple. So this whole relationship with the facility manager or the fleet manager is good, but the relationship with the actual electric fleet is the most important. That I think a lot of these siloed or like isolated or offshore charging providers from Europe or Asia, they're just not in the mix. They're not fighting that fight. And so, good luck getting a hold of them.
That's what I was curious about because I heard like in the US market, it was explained to me that it's kind of the Wild West where we have various hardware providers, various batteries, various software, other payment rails. But in Europe, it's almost like a form of integration where the utilities are like, you're going to use utility brand stuff. We're going to make you all
Mm.
standardized. Is that one of the things where the U.S. market having this Orange EV and the Optigrid solution can kind of help make things easier? Because it was such a fascinating thing when we're talking about electrification that it does feel like the Wild West in the U.S. and we are looking for those kind of turnkey, all-in-one solutions to reduce
Mm.
this complexity.
Well, I mean, the good news about Europe is that each one of those countries can have really strong, like nation state level requirements. And so they can kind of force everyone to play by the right rules. In the United States, California acts that way, but everyone else is kind of either going with the herd or they're trying to stay as close to California's regulations. I mean, they even have it in the legal code that they're allowed to make unique decisions when it comes to emission standards and emissions regulations. And so it's every state's having to figure this out, and it's just kind of that's really the difficult part. And the utilities here, yeah, there's some publicly traded ones, but a lot of them are somewhat government entities. They have an elected member, or like in Washington State, they're county level, and so it's a bit of a patchwork in the United States, even with the largest utilities. And so I think a little bit of a little bit of lack of regulatory authority for someone like a state of Washington to push and force this onto all the businesses there. And also there's a bit of competition. It's like if you can take your operations and shift it to a state that has less regulations for the time being, maybe that makes it easier. And so I think that here it's more about what we're focused on, which is being responsive to the uniqueness of each state, each facility, each port. I'm learning a lot about ports. I had no background on it until recently, but going to IANA and going to AAPA up in Quebec City, what I found was that they have a saying that if you've been to one port, you've been to one port, because they're all so unique in their approach. And what we're finding is facilities are kind of similar. Yeah, they have a lot of the same challenges, but they each have a unique approach, a unique set of challenges to them, and kind of a unique structure to deal with them. So it's a lot more about building a solution that works in a lot of situations, and then us as a company or us as a solution provider adapting to the customer's needs as quickly as possible, and then staying with them as they figure it out. Because, I mean, what percentage of all vehicles are EV right now in the United States? It's below 10%. When that doubles and triples and doubles again, then what's going to happen? You know, we're really at the starting pistol just went off. And so it's about being responsive and listening to folks and helping them through their next challenge, which we're not quite sure what that's going to be.
When we're looking at build out, where are the areas of growth, especially when you're seeing an EV and infrastructure? I know California is a big one. We've seen movements in drayage because there's a lot of great use
Mhm.
cases and applications. What's kind of the vibes? You mentioned getting to go to some of these conferences. What are some of the things you're also hearing about that, where folks are thinking, "Well, I'm seeing this. This is cool tech. Where should I keep an eye on?"
I mean, California is always like right there in the front of it because, you know, they still have a lot of their own state level and, you know, utility specific, you know, incentives and regulations. But, you know, the Pacific Northwest, you know, Seattle, Puget Sound area is pretty good. The Northeast corridor, you know, New Jersey, New York, you know, a little bit in Boston and stuff. And then Texas is kind of interesting. It's the Wild West. It's because it's kind of a true free market. I mean, it's similar to the way Australia is, like where, you know, you can free retail an electron. There's, you know, the regulations are about making sure that they do it in a way that's safe and not about, you know, monopolistic practices or, you know, gaming the system. And so that's really interesting too. And then the other one that's very, very different, which is actually more like California than anyone, is Canada. They still have a lot of federal level incentives and kind of, you know, regulations that push them in that direction. And, you know, they have a lot of, you know, extreme weather stuff that can bring down the grid. So you also have, when you go north of the 45th parallel, you have a lot of at-risk locations where the grid, no matter how green, no matter how beautiful it is, it will still go down. And so having resiliency, the battery inside of it, is now having this secondary effect, which is keep your operations going in those weird situations, you know?
Kind of curious as well. Being in Chattanooga, our grid, unfortunately, a lot of our lines are above ground, which normally is not a
Mm-mm.
problem, except that we have a lot of trees, and our trees keep knocking out our power lines. Heck, I even had one hit my house last year. So we have grid challenges, even though we have nuclear and all these various energy sources.
Mm.
So if that happens, and I have, let's say I'm a facility, I've got some of these orange juicers. Can I allow the
Mhm.
juicers who have been slowly getting charged, you know, taking as they need it, can they then turn into like little batteries to help with some critical systems? Or is that a way that we're seeing looking ahead, turning these chargers into a symbiotic relationship?
Yeah, I mean, you're right there. I mean, as soon as you pile up enough batteries in one location, the question of, you know, off-grid support or microgrid or, you know, kind of just supporting the facility and not pushing back to the grid, all that comes into the conversation. But first and foremost, it's keeping the operation going because most of the outages we're talking to, especially like at the ports and in some of these hubs, is the wind knocks down a power line and then it's back up within 4 hours, usually 2 to 4 hours. If you can just keep the operations going for 2 or 4 hours, keep the trucks charging, keeps the lights on, keep the emergency lights on, you can keep going so that way that shift doesn't go home. Because you know, like going down for half a day, you know, for a specific site could be, you know, $30,000, $40,000 per truck in operation, or millions of dollars for the facility to shut down and relaunch. And so that kind of grid resiliency, like a buffer for a short-term fix, is really valuable today and tomorrow at a lot of locations. That whole concept of powering the facility would take quite a bit more batteries, you know, especially, you know, if you start looking into, powering HVAC systems in the summer or heating in the winter. But, A, then B, then C. A, get them going on their fleet electrification. B, be an emergency backup, be there for them when they need it. And then C, if we're their chosen partner, then we'd love to help them keep their facility going. Or the best thing is, over time, can we get them off the grid? Can they have rooftop solar? Can they have batteries? Can they have nearby, generation to run off of, rather than be dependent on something far away, which now they're going to compete on with all those AI server farms they're building. So, just moving the energy production closer to the facility, even on the facility, and moving the storage into the facility is just a great path to go down.
And compared to, that was one of the big things, AI and data centers, everyone's competing against them. They want to set up, they're very hungry. They're like server farms with GPUs. When we're looking at pitching these specific bespoke units to a utility, how much draw is the juicer taking compared to like me doing a full 3-year infrastructure rollout? I got the transmission lines, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
We're married now. What are some of the ways that, talk about some of that in terms of the footprint? Because I think it's so fascinating that you have the potential to not take as much, you keep it in the charge, you have a reservoir, and you quickly dispense it and then slowly bring it back up based on when you need it.
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces to that. So let me try to break through them. So the first is getting more energy, getting more capacity from the local utility. There's a lot of places in the United States where you can ask for a megawatt and they'll drop it. But, the question mark is, how long will it take? And then once it's to your facility, wiring it into your facility's panel, or, maybe you have to buy a transformer, a couple $100,000, and then rewire your facility, is not zero. What that is dependent, how much the utility is willing to help you. Like, it's a question mark. In Southern California, they won't even drop you more power, or you're on a 3-year waiting list. In some place like Kansas City, they'll drop you more power, but then the question is, how much does it take? I can't really give a straight answer on that because it just depends, but it's not zero. Usually it's in the $50,000 to $100,000 just to get it going. When you want to build out kind of all the charging infrastructure facilities, if you're doing roadside charging, they'll just ship a pallet that has all of them connected. They'll do construction on the side of the road. Maybe it's a year project. On a facility, now you're talking about taking a portion of your facility down to do tearing things out, doing trenching, doing cabling, all that kind of stuff. Now you have a serious question of how much downtime is there, which is just pure money. And then how long is it going to last you? So if you decided not to put any batteries and you just got the exact amount of capacity dropped from the utility, you got it all wired, you got it all going, do you buy just enough for the next 2 years? Or is it because you're doing so much, you got to get a lot more power drop, you got to do a lot more construction, a lot more downtime to be able to power you for the next 5 years? Then how much is that going to cost? So you can easily go from, man, I've just been buying $30,000 DC fast chargers for the last 5 years. And now, in order for me to go and basically plan ahead for the next 5 years without adding batteries, now we're talking about $3 million. $30,000 to keep going, to having to drop $3 million. As far as a CapEx, it just becomes so cost prohibitive that a lot of these fleet electrification folks are just pausing. They're just like, hey, let's pause for a while, let's pile up some cash. Or they're saying, how do we go around this? Or how do we shift to an external depot charging place? They're trying to figure out ways around it. And even Zeem and some of these other folks are just shipping them diesel generators with batteries and chargers attached to them, it kind of looks like a Rube Goldberg device, but it's because they just need to keep rolling out trucks and wait until they can justify this massive capital expenditure. So when you're looking at $3 million, and then you look at one of ours, which is under $200,000, now it's like you can drop those in and incrementally keep going until you decide you want to drop the $3 million and then wait for the utility.
That answered one of my big questions here. Looking ahead, as we got a little bit of time left, kind of you're envisioning one of the futures is just like with the orange juicer, this bespoke, modular, all-in-one, just because of the constraints and limitations of existing infrastructure. This does feel like the faster opportunity, and then the ROI question becomes a lot easier to figure out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really for them, they're making the justification on how much those trucks save them on fuel as opposed to gas vehicles or diesel vehicles. They're looking on how much it saves them on repair and downtime versus gas vehicles. The justification for everyone that we're talking to has already been made at the board level, all the way through to electrify their fleet. They just didn't quite account for these bottlenecks and hurdles. And so we're just keeping them going while we talk to them and work with them to come out with the next set of products that lets them keep going on their journey. Because a lot of these folks are just at the start. Maybe their facility in New Jersey has started going down this. There are other facilities in, Boston, Philadelphia, and, Biloxi, Mississippi haven't even started. So it's just solving this initial problem at scale across all these facilities and then listening to them and being their trusted partner so we can help them with the next hurdle.
Well, the future is bright, especially given the cool stuff coming out and what you all are working on as well. Tyler, thank you so much for hopping on the show, talking with me today. Folks want to learn more about Optigrid and what y'all are working on. What's the best way to get more info?
Optigridllc.com is the best way. And then we're also represented on our partner, orangeev.com.
Perfect. Tyler, thank you so much for hopping on. We'll definitely have to catch up again soon.
Thank you very much, and I'll see you very soon, I'm sure.
That's going to be a wrap for this episode. If you're just joining us, we're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you can find your podcast needs. While you're at it, subscribe to the Truck Tech newsletter. It goes out every Friday. You don't want to miss it. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for the folks at Optigrid. Check them out, Orange EV and the Orange Juicer. That's it for this week. Tune in again later. I'll see you again soon.